Hello students. In this video lecture we will discuss one more important life process, that's the transportation. We started with the nutrition, then respiration, now the next is the transportation. Student, we need food. So to consume the food we have a process, that's a nutrition. So in nutrition we discussed how do we consume the food. Now that consumed food should be broken down so that we obtain the energy. Now, to break down that consumed food and to obtain the energy, we studied the respiration. So, in the respiration process, the consumed food is broken down and energy is released. We get the energy. Now, students, before we break down the food and obtain the energy, that food should be transported. The food should be transported to the cells so that the food is broken down and the energy is released inside the cells. Now, there should be a system in place which can carry that food, to the cells, and the carried food inside the cell is broken down in presence of oxygen and energy is released. So student, in this chapter we will be discussing about the transportation of the food. The digested food is transported to the cells and the energy is produced. So we'll discuss about the transportation system. Now student, there should be something that can transport the food, that can transport the oxygen to the cells, or a system should be there that can eliminate the wastes generated during the production of energy. So what are those systems and the organ taking part in the systems? Let's talk about the same. Here is the first point, student. Blood. Blood is one component of the transportation system. Blood transports the food, oxygen and waste materials in our bodies. Now, as I mentioned, the food, oxygen should be transported to the cells. Now, who will do this? The blood is the component that can that transports the food and oxygen to the different cells. Now, inside the cells, waste are generated. That waste should be eliminated. Now, to eliminate this, the waste should be carried. Now, who will carry this waste? Again, the blood will carry the wastes from our body. Now, student, one more point is there. Oxygen is carried by the RBC. So inside our blood, there is a component called RBC, that's the red blood cells. Now, red blood cells have a component called hemoglobin that has a special affinity, means attraction towards the oxygen. So this hemoglobin is responsible for carrying the oxygen in our blood. Now, student, this blood should be transported. The blood should reach each and every part of our body. Now, to make this blood reach each and every part of our body, there should be something that pumps the blood. So we need a pumping organ. We need a pumping organ to push the blood around the body. A network of tubes to reach all the tissues. So pumping organ will generate the pressure. Pumping organ will make the pressure, create the pressure that can push the blood to different parts. But to run the bloods, we need a vessels. We need a pipes, tubes. So pumping organ, that's the heart, and blood is the fluid that will carry all the foods or the oxygen or the waste materials and different components to different part of our body, and that is carried through the tubes, a network of tubes that spreads throughout our body. So that's the arteries and veins. Next point, student, for the transportation of a nutrients, waste product, respiratory gases. Now, respiratory gases means oxygen and carbon dioxide are the respiratory gases. We inhale oxygen and we exhale the carbon dioxide out. So these are the respiratory gases. Now, to carry all these nutrients, that's a food, waste products, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and hormones throughout the body, we have a circulatory system. Now, student, let's talk about the circulatory system. So here we have a flow chart to understand the circulatory systems. Now, circulatory system, three important components are there. One is circulatory medium, which is blood. We have a blood vessels that makes our circulatory system. Blood vessels, these are the tubes that will carry the blood. That's arteries, veins, and capillaries. Students, we have three different type of tubes in our body. That's the arteries, veins, and capillaries. We will discuss about this a little later. So arteries, veins, and capillaries, these are the blood vessels. Next comes our pumping organ, that's the heart. Now the heart will be pumping the blood through arteries and veins that will carry the blood to different part of our body. Now students, let's talk about this blood. Now students, we studied about this blood. Blood is a connective tissues. Blood is a connective tissue. Now blood contains a component called hemoglobin, which makes the blood look red. So red color of the blood is due to the presence of this component called hemoglobin. Next, the student, component of a blood. Blood have important compounds like plasma, that's a fluid part of the blood. Next is the blood cells like RBC, WBC, and platelets. RBC, that's a red blood cells. WBC, it's a white blood cells, and platelets. RBC, that contains the hemoglobin, and as I mentioned, that hemoglobin is the component which has a special attraction towards the oxygen, that combines with the oxygen, carries the oxygen to different part of our body. Now WBC is also the soldiers, we can say, so soldiers of the body that helps fight our body against the disease. Now platelets is a component of a blood that helps the blood clotting. If we get cut somewhere in our body, the blood oozes out of it. So after some time, we can see the blood stops. So the blood flow stops because of the presence of this component, that's the platelets. So platelets helps in blood clotting. Next comes blood. Next point, blood carries oxygen, carbon dioxide, hormones, and wastes, etc. So these are the important points that is about the bloods. Now next comes our arteries and veins and capillaries. Now these are the blood vessels that carries the blood. Now let's talk about this arteries and veins in brief. What is arteries, students? These are the tubes. Arteries and veins and capillaries, all are the tubes. Arteries, these are the tubes that carries blood away from the heart. Blood away from the heart. We'll discuss this after a short while. Next, veins just do the opposite. These veins are the tubes that carries the blood towards the heart. Next, student, arteries have a thick wall. These are the tubes with thicker wall. And veins walls are thin. Now students, why do we need this arteries to have a thicker wall? Because the arteries carries blood with a higher pressure. Now to tolerate that higher pressure, these arteries have a thicker wall, and when the blood runs through the veins, the blood doesn't have a very high pressure, so that's why the wall of these veins are thin. Next comes, do not have a valves. Arteries don't have a valves. Now what is valves, student? Valves is something that can control the flow of a liquid. So arteries don't have a valves, but veins have a valves. Now students, why the veins have a valves? Because the blood runs through the veins very slowly. So the blood may flow backward. Now to prevent the backward flow of the blood through the veins have a valve that prevents the backward flow of a blood. That's what the arteries and veins, students. Now we have another type of tubes, that's the capillaries. They're very fine tubes which joins arteries and veins. Now student, here is a block diagram to understand the working of our human heart. Let's try and understand the working of this human heart. How does our heart pump the blood to different part of our body? Student, this is the block diagram explaining the working of a human heart. Now student, we have our lungs here, and this is the body parts, body organs. So lungs and body organs are connected by different tubes. We can see here, these are the veins and arteries. These are the tubes which carries the blood throughout our body. So lungs, you can see this is the part, this is the heart. So human heart, it's a 4-chamber heart, student. We can see the different chambers are there. This is our heart. It's a 4-chamber heart, mammalian heart. So we have 4 chamber. This is 1 chamber. This is Another chamber, this is third chamber, that's the fourth chamber. This is the left atrium. This chamber of the heart is called a left atrium. This is called a left ventricle. This is right atrium, and this is right ventricle. Now students, these two chambers are separated by a valve. These are the valves that controls the flow of a blood. These are the valves that controls the flow of a blood. Now that's what our heart, four chamber heart. Now student, this heart is connected to different part of our body. We can see here lungs. Lungs and heart is connected. Lungs and heart is connected. And again heart and body is connected. So these are the tubes that carries the blood throughout our body. Now student, let's try and understand the different tubes. As I mentioned about the arteries and veins. Arteries and veins are the tubes that carries blood, both the type of blood. Both the type of blood means oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood is the blood which is full of a pure oxygen, and deoxygenated blood is the blood that is devoid of pure oxygen and fully rich with the carbon dioxides, the liquid wastes, and different type of solid wastes. Let's understand. Here is a tube that connects our lungs and heart. This is called pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein. Now this vein, this tube carries oxygenated blood. This tube carries oxygenated blood. Now we have another tube which is called main artery, which is also called aorta, which carries oxygenated blood. Now we have the another tube. This is called main vein. Main vein, which is also called a vena cava. Now this tube carries deoxygenated blood, means the blood which is devoid of pure oxygen and is rich with the wastes. We have this tube which connects our heart and this lung. This tube is called pulmonary arteries, which also carries the deoxygenated blood. Now students, let's understand. When we inhale the oxygen, so the pure oxygen fills this lung. Now through this lung, the pure oxygen travels towards the heart through this tube. So this tube is carrying the pure oxygen, student. So this tube, which is also called a pulmonary vein, this is carrying the pure oxygen. Now this pure oxygen will enter this left atrium of our heart, and this blood will flow towards the left ventricle through this valve. Now this valve, the moment blood enters this ventricle, this valve closes. That's how the backward flow of the blood is controlled by this valve. Now when our heart contracts, the contraction of our heart pushes the blood from this left ventricle towards our body through this tube, which is called a main artery, or also called oxygenated blood. Now student, from here the blood was carrying the pure oxygen. The blood carrying pure oxygen enters the left atrium, then left ventricle, and through these arteries it is transported to the body organs, the different body organs where the blood is needed. Now the pure oxygen is exchanged here. How it's exchanged, we will discuss. The pure oxygen and impure oxygen is exchanged here. So this tube was carrying the pure oxygen, and here in our body the pure oxygen is exchanged with the wastes. Now when the blood comes out of our body, now in this tube the blood will carry only the deoxygenated blood. That means the blood which is full with the wastes. Now this wastes containing blood is taken to the heart, the right atrium, by this tube which is called a vein, main vein, that is vena cava. this will carry the deoxygenated blood to our right atrium, and when our heart contracts, the contraction of the heart will push that blood carrying wastes into our right ventricle, and this valve closes that prevents the backward flow of the blood. Again, when the heart contracts, the contraction of the heart will push the deoxygenated blood, the blood containing the waste, through this tube to the lungs. Now, through this lungs, what happens? The blood carrying carbon dioxide is exhaled out. So when we inhale the oxygen, when we inhale the air, the oxygen is carried by the blood to the left atrium, then to the left ventricle, and the pure oxygen will go to the blood, go to the body. In this body, the pure oxygen is exchanged with the impure, or we can say the wastes, carbon dioxide. So that carbon dioxide will be transported back to the heart through the right atrium to the right ventricle and is sent back to the lungs. So carbon dioxide is exhaled out. So this is how our body, this heart, or we can say the pumping organ, works. Now, student, as I mentioned, in our body organs, the impure or the waste, we can say the waste gases like carbon dioxide and the pure oxygen is exchanged. Let's see, if we magnify this, it will be looking like this. The structure will be something like this. Now, student, you can compare this one. Now, student, you can compare this tube with this arteries. This artery is drawn here. This is the artery which is carrying the oxygenated blood from our lungs to heart and heart to the body. So here this artery is carrying the oxygenated blood, and when it enters inside the body, this is our body, this arteries will divide into fine tubes, very fine and thin tubes. That is called capillaries. So these are the capillaries. Now this capillaries again joins back to make vein. So here is the vein. That means inside this body, inside this part, we have a fine tubes. That's what the capillaries. So this artery will divide into fine tubes, that's capillaries, and capillaries joins back to make the veins. So this is the internal structure. So this blood which is carrying the oxygenated, this blood which is carrying the pure oxygen enters inside this capillaries. So in this capillaries, the oxygen and the carbon dioxide exchange the nearby cells. You can see here is the cell, here is the cell. So the direction of arrow indicates the movement, the exchange of gases. So inside this cell, suppose carbon dioxide is more, and here in this capillaries, oxygen is more because the blood is carrying oxygen. So oxygen is more here, carbon dioxide is more here. So there is a concentration gradient, means diffusion will take place. Now students, we know what is diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of anything from a higher concentration region to the lower concentration region. So because oxygen is more here, so oxygen will diffuse inside the cell, and carbon dioxide is more here, so carbon dioxide will diffuse into this capillaries. So the moment blood comes out of it, the blood will be carrying all the carbon dioxides. That means the blood will be carrying the carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide will reach into the lung, and that's how it is taken to the lungs and it is excreted out. So this is how our circulatory system, or the human heart, the pumping organ, works. I hope students, you understood this. Thank you.